So so yeah, so at some point you really begin to, oh, sorry, my bad.
Oh, it's okay. You can keep asking questions.
Oh, yeah, yeah, exactly, because the question will be on camera anyway. At some point you become comfortable with this idea of chaos and dissonance as being something to explore in music. Was it hard getting out of the strictures and structures of music? Because, you grew up in a time when rock and roll was like, technically you were born when Elvis was first on TV. That's crazy. That's
Yeah,
so can't believe.
I grew up fast.
Oh, my bad. So was it, growing up in truly the age of rock and roll and psychedelic rock and heavy metal, was it hard to get to kind of fly the coop, or fly the nest of like what people thought music should be? What was so dang popular on the radio too, like
I don't think it was really hard for me because
make sure you say what was like. Say it wasn't hard for me to get out like the structure and confines of music at the time. In some ways, even though I grew up at a time, maybe kind of talk to that, like the fact that you're coming of age. You don't have to give away your age if you want to per se, but like you can allude to the fact that by the time I'm a teenager, rock, because you're a teenager in like 71, 70. You talk about like the golden age of classic rock and everything else that's going on. So you maybe just talk about that.
the cultural influences of the time when I grew up, like probably what some people might consider the golden age of classic rock, didn't really confine me. And part of the reason is that the aesthetic that I picked up from that is that you pretty much do what you wanted to do. I think music opened up. Rock and roll no longer was confined to like these doo-wop roots, big band roots, whatever. And people were starting to experiment and do different things. You started to see collaborations between different folks, like, for example, people were using synthesizers, which initially I think were probably developed to emulate orchestral music, but they creeped into rock and things like that. So it was an age, I think, of experimentation. Maybe that's what happened. I felt like, I don't have to do it any particular way because so many people were doing it differently. I started off playing saxophone, started school with a lot of people did in song groups, and I went to alto saxophone, and I went to that because my dad played alto, and he gave me an alto saxophone. I did that for a while, and I did the thing of like playing the parts in the back of the Temptations type band, the little horn lines. And then, like I said, by the time I heard Coltrane, I didn't really understand it, but I knew that it could be freer. And then I heard Hendrix and decided I wanted to play some guitar. My dad, who really encouraged me, was like, yeah, okay, let's go trade the saxophone in and get you a guitar. So we did that. But my father also encouraged me to be open because he would turn me on to different things. Like I said, he turned me on to Charlie Parker, but he also turned me on to people like Rufus Harlow, who played jazz bagpipes. He did it without the drums, but he played the actual horn part. He also turned me on to Oscar Pettiford, and I remember he turned me on to an album called My Little Cello. It's the first time I'd ever heard anybody play jazz cello. My dad's favorite record was one called Floyd's Guitar Blues, and it featured like what people call Hawaiian guitar, and lap steel, that type of thing. So my dad encouraged me to find other sounds and listen to unique stuff, and therefore be unique. So I never felt constrained. I think when I got older, every now and then I'd run into some musicians who were invested in that, and they would go, well, that's not the right way to do that. And there would be this thing where I would feel like, oh man, maybe I should do that. And then like, nah, never mind. I'm gonna be me. And I had other people encourage me, not just be you. A few years back, I wanted to study formal composition with a friend of mine who was a classical composer. And I came to him and he went, now you don't need to study with me. He said, just write the way you write. He said, this is your unique voice. He said, if you get stuck and you have a problem that you want to work out, call me. It's Chris Bukowski. He's a great pianist, a great composer. And another person who kind of mentored me, Joseph Daly from the Joseph Daly Tuba Trio, really famous, super famous jazz musician, composer. Pretty much told me the same thing. You know, write the way you write, form this music, give it some life, and it'll tell you what it needs to do. Right? Joseph was like, write in your unique voice, play in your unique voice.
Yeah. So in that chaos and dissonance, or in dissonance alone, and not staying stuck in a preconceived, harmonic or melodic structure. What do you think happens there in that space that doesn't happen if you stay in the confines? So, taking a chance with chaos and dissonance, what does it give, what does it provide or offer up that the other one doesn't?
There are theories about harmony and what we might call dissonance that lead to the idea that what was dissonant 200 years ago can now become something beautiful. And we recognize it because spiritually we've evolved to a place where we see more complexity in the universe. So, for example, you might not have heard 200 years ago people writing major, minor, 7 chords or something like that traditionally in music, in certain cadences, and people would have heard them as like dissonant at some point. Like, Stravinsky's music at one time was considered very dissonant. Now it's considered beautiful because folks said that ears have changed, but I think that what it really amounts to is our consciousness has changed. And like I said, the universe may seem chaotic if all I can see is this part of it. But as I start to see this expanded view of cosmos, some things that look chaotic, you may say, wow, I see this happening over and over, parsecs away from here. And all of a sudden, it's no longer chaotic because it's a pattern that I couldn't see before. So I think exploring that sometimes helps to start an evolutionary process in us internally, spiritually. We can see a much broader pattern in existence. So I think what happens, at least from my standpoint, is that I knew that those things weren't purely chaotic, and I started to explore them. And by exploring them, sometimes things that might have been instinctively there, all of a sudden it's like, here it is, they get revealed. Like I said, with me, a lot of times writing music, things come to me, and I don't know why I want to do it that way, but it's almost like I'm asking a question. And so I'll write something, play it for a while, as Joseph said, play it for a while, and it starts to tell me something. The answers come from it. But the initial composition was a question, not a statement. But I get the answer from listening to it myself, going, oh, that's what that means.
Yeah, that's cool.
I've got a friend, teacher, mentor, brother, Shemuel, who deals with a lot of very deep spiritual concepts. And, sometimes, he used to send me a note, he still does. And at first, first, like, he'd ask me these questions, and I was like, oh, okay, it's the teacher asking me, do I understand this? And a couple of times I sent him something back after I thought about an answer, and he'd go, oh, thank you. And then he explained to me that a lot of things come to him. They may come to him in meditation. They may come to him in a state of giving an offering. And they aren't necessarily apparent what they mean to him. And so he'll ask people what they see because sometimes that's the answer, but the question came to him. So that helped me to understand that sometimes that what comes to me musically is a question that I really don't have the answer to. And sometimes other people provide the answer. And sometimes after it's been produced and I hear it, and I'm like, oh, that's what that means. And like I said, it looks like chaos when I don't have enough information to discern the patterns. Sometimes it's like hearing somebody speaking a foreign language that doesn't make sense until I've been exposed to the vocabulary, or a bit of the vocabulary and a bit of the grammar. Then I can discern some meaning. It doesn't mean, just because, for example, I don't speak a particular language, just because I don't speak it doesn't mean that it's chaos. It simply means that I don't have the information to understand it yet. But I can hear something in it. There music that I've heard that I didn't know why. Like first time I heard a raga, I knew that it moved me, but I didn't know that there was some symbolic meaning to why certain ones sounded a certain way. But I knew not to judge them as chaos simply because I didn't understand.
Yeah, like the Indian records.
Yes.
Yeah. Pretty good.
Yeah, I'm just gonna make sure.
Yeah, you're good. Yeah, I like that. It's funny because the sun kind of dimmed for a second, and that orange gets even richer.
Then you come, yeah.
Yeah, and then it kind of gets.
It's
a little-
always when you say something that's getting important, you know, it's like my influence is bam.
It's a slight change in the glow. Really good stuff. Yeah, because I was just gonna ask you, was there? Oh, go ahead.
You can keep going. Yeah.
Well, I probably maybe we can talk about like Arabic and Indian music a bit, if that's been a thing for you.
Yeah, it's interesting because I can get into. There's a book that also had another person who had a lot of influence on music. And a book.
Yeah. Any poems and books. I mean, obviously, we don't want to talk too deeply about K2 today per se, but yeah, any like non-Fort Wayne, literature, poets, whatever that maybe along the way really tripped your brain a bit. Doing a little Dutch angle there. What's going on?
Love arts.
Yeah, no, I like it. It's something different.
Go ahead.
Very
I'm,
good.
Whenever you're.
Yeah, maybe talk about literature and film or poetry, any other art forms that have fed your musical journey and your musical direction.
As I often say, music is another language to me. And as another language, I can relate to other things. I'm influenced by a lot of things. Poetry, books. People like Richard Wright, when I was reading that stuff, had a big influence on me. Books like Native Son, Black Boy, American Hunger, things like that, just gave me ideas about things to talk about, but it also let me see what was in some of the music that came. I love jazz. Some people may see it as sounds like a certain theory behind how to play, but a lot of that was created as revolutionary thought too. It was like people saying, you know what, I'm going to speak in ways that are beyond, bebop musicians stepped out and they were revolutionaries. They did not want to be tied into the confines of what other people said, and so coming with even rock and roll. Oh, people call it race music because it wasn't accepted. But what it meant was people taking charge of themselves. Like, you can take this and you can call it this and you can denigrate it, but you can't stop me from speaking in the ways that I want to. For example, blues. A lot of people forget the link between blues and gospel and spiritual music in the concept of a lot of African cosmologies that see that the physical world and the spiritual world exist in the same space side by side. That's why the book, My Life in the Bush of Ghostlight, and Tutuola was very influential to me, because it's like, okay, spirit and the physical are not separate. What happens physically happens spiritually. What happens spiritually is reflected in the physical world. So those things obviously have an impact. Like I know some of the other stuff. When I first started to mess with synthesizers and sequencing and things like that, I worked in my friend Craig Harding at Ajax recording studio, Ajax Sounds, and some of the earlier pieces I wrote were based on biblical ideas. And so the sounds were trying to reflect what was going on. And one piece was called Golgotha. And it was about crucifixion. Another one was about spirit descending into humanity. And so those things led me to write those pieces, things that I have been exposed to, spiritual ideas, as well as political ideas, as well as cultural ideas. And a lot of them through reading, some of them through movies, and music. And it's not to say that music didn't affect me, because a lot of music that I heard really gave me concepts about music. I also grew up on James Brown, love James Brown, Joe Tex, that kind of stuff, which still kind of colors my concept of what soul music is now, I went through this phase the other day where I listened to a bunch of old Joe Tex. So everything informs me, because I listen to things, I read things, I see things and realize that these were created by other human beings, and they're trying to tell me something. My friend Dave Streeter gave me a documentary once called Jackie McLean on Mars, and Jackie McLean was a great saxophone player, jazz saxophonist and educator. But he talked about that music always has something behind it. Like, a lot of people discount disco as this vapid stuff that has no meaning, but Jackie McLean points out disco started to go after, for example, he said after the assassination of John Kennedy, after the assassination of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Robert Kennedy, and he said, to him it was like, people like, man, this is too heavy, I just want to dance. I just want to forget about all this stuff. There's a Bob Marley song that has a lyric, forget your troubles and dance, forget your sickness and dance. So Jackie McLean says that, you don't listen to disco and say, this is like what's stuff. No, you listen to it and you hear, you understand the zeitgeist. What's going on with these people? They're tired of all of this heavy stuff. They just, I just want to forget about this. You can talk about grunge that way. You could talk about R&B at the period that Sly Stone and people like that were coming out, and Curtis Mayfield addressing race in America in a different way. Some of it hopeful, like, hey, let's get together. and some people saying, look, this is an injustice. But, and it wasn't just the necessarily lyrics of it, but the music had a certain feel, a certain stride to it, pride to it, that wasn't hiding the fact that, look, I feel good about myself. This is who I am, no matter what anyone says.
Great stuff. Do you think the fact that so much of the fact that pop music is as popular as it is, as opposed to music that maybe tries to get at a little bit deeper stuff, what do you think that says? Or is there something like in all pop music, maybe over the last like 4 decades, that is deeper and that's going on? Because like you said, there's something behind the music. There always is. But you know, have we lost that sense of, you know, really saying something? I mean, I guess that's kind of a dumb question, because I'm saying no matter what, you know, Justin Bieber to Britney Spears to, you know, whoever, Taylor Swift, people will say. I had somebody just said the other day, last weekend, you know, I had some friends over. She was a little tipsy, but she said, you know, Taylor Swift is a true poet. You know, she really is, and I think people need to, you know, if they really sat in this way. Have you ever listened to her or something? I was like, not really. I mean, I've heard a few of them for sure, obviously. But do you think there's something in pop music? The reason why it's so popular is because it makes its statements so obvious and doesn't really obviously live in that gray area of, you know, like. It's so funny you mentioned disco, because I literally wrote just last weekend, because I'm working on my autobiography, just because I'm at that age where if I don't do it now, I might not ever do it. I've been working on it for like the
It
Oh,
last
says
7 years.
350 on this card, so yeah, just so you know.
Oh, has it been that long?
Yeah,
Holy crap! All right.
I have another backup card, but just so you know, we'll have to
No.
stop at about 3:30.
3 minutes 30 seconds.
Yes.
Okay. Well, sorry. I'll tell you about it in a minute. I'll tell you when we're done. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything you want to say on that or not. I love everything you're saying. So I don't know if there's something you would want to say on that idea that like is the reason why pop music is so damn popular is because its statements and message are so obvious, you know. And are we losing that even more? I mean, pop music's always been way more popular than the more avant-garde stuff. It just always has. Is it because the message is so simple and so straight in your face and you don't have to work for it? I don't know if that's even pertinent to what you're doing. I think it's an interesting question.
You know, pop music might be popular because it is accessible. But that doesn't negate its validity, because it's speaking to something. And I think a lot of pop music is about aspiration. A lot of people say, what? Well, a lot of people follow certain pop artists, you know, whether it's Rihanna, Taylor Swift, or whatever, because they express some things where people, a couple things. Number one, a lot of times people go, that's my song, I can relate to that, because they hear something in there that relates to their life. The other thing I say is aspirational, because they see, and not just on the surface of how these people may be stars and live a certain way, but they see these people looking at life a certain way, and they aspire to be able to do that. Like, I think everybody wants life to be good. So you see this pop artist, and even with the breakup song, if the breakup song is a little bouncy, you can say, yeah, you know, I'm tired of this person, but I'm feeling good about myself. It relates.
Stop there.
Okay. Common thoughts. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
It's amazing how fast it's moving. But how long has it been running? We've only been running 24 minutes?
That's the second clip.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, because we stopped to switch
Okay,
it.
so are we approaching